Hello everyone. I'm really glad you're here. Tonight, I want to help you let go of the day and ease into rest. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, and it means a lot to be part of your nightly routine. So if you haven't already, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It truly helps. Now, settle in, close your eyes, and let's begin. Story 1. The Hollow in the Woods. I grew up in a quiet, half-forgotten town in the English Midlands, the kind of place that sits between countryside and memory, wrapped in a haze of misty mornings and half-familiar smells. Our little town was flanked by farmland, paddocks, and the remnants of old woodland that curled around the edge like vines on an aging wall. One patch of woods nestled between an athletic track and the old train line, its entrance marked by a long-abandoned bridge, now overgrown with soft moss and grass. To anyone else, it might seem like an unremarkable patch of trees, planted within my parents' lifetimes, but to me, it felt older than time itself. I was just 13 when it happened, an awkward, hormonally charged boy still learning to read faces and intentions. I was also naive in that dangerous, unshaped way. There's a strange vulnerability to those early teenage years. I had recently become friends with a boy named Ben at school, and though he was cool enough, it was his twin sister, Alice, who had truly captured my attention. Alice wasn't like the other girls. She had a messy charm, a kind of beauty that didn't quite care for neatness, while others saw her creased school blouse and tangled hair and dismissed her as careless. I saw something magnetic, something raw and real in her disheveled state. Her eyes held secrets, and her silence made you want to lean in closer. I stared at her too often, and Ben noticed. He pulled me aside one day, looked me dead in the eyes, and warned me really, to stay away from his sister, but I brushed it off as brotherly protectiveness. What was the worst that could happen? I asked Alice out, and we decided to meet for a walk in the woods. Or at least, that's what I thought the plan was. The patch of woods was small, barely 15 minutes from one side to the other, even if you walked slowly, but that didn't matter. When we met, she took my hand in hers and led me off the path, through the underbrush and down a small slope, away from everything and everyone. She guided us with eerie certainty, dodging foxholes and tree roots, as though she had done this 100 times before. Then she stopped beside a large, hollow tree and turned to me with a strange glint in her eyes. "Do you like bondage, Henry?" she asked, her tone casual, almost playful. I froze. I didn't expect a question like that from someone our age, especially not her. Still, I mumbled an embarrassed yes, thinking maybe this was going to be one of those exciting, secretive moments teenagers fantasize about. She crouched beside the tree, reached into the hollow, and pulled out a small metal box. With practiced ease, she opened it and revealed its contents. Cigarettes, a knife, oracle cards, an adult toy, and to my surprise and slight concern, a real pair of handcuffs, the kind that didn't just pop open. She fastened one end to the tree and the other to my wrist. I didn't resist. I was excited, confused, and curious, trying to convince myself that this was just the beginning of something thrilling. Alice didn't smile. She didn't kiss me or even lean in close. Instead, she picked up the knife, flicked it open, and stared at me as she ran her tongue along the blade. A chill ran through me. I laughed nervously, trying to play it off. But when she stepped toward me with a glint in her eye that wasn't playful, I knew something was very wrong. "Alice, what are you doing?" I asked, voice shaking. She leaned in and whispered, "Let's call it penetration," before plunging the knife into my side. I screamed. She laughed. Then she did it again, 5 times in total. My stomach, my hip, my shoulder, my thigh, and my arm. Pain exploded like fireworks inside me. blinding and hot. Blood soaked through my shirt, and tears poured down my face. Still cuffed, I was helpless, sobbing and pleading as she watched me with delighted cruelty. By what can only be described as divine timing, or sheer luck, a man named Edward happened to be jogging past the old bridge. Hearing my screams, he ran into the woods without hesitation, following the sounds until he found us. Alice turned on him, knife raised, but Edward was trained in martial arts and managed to disarm her without injury. In a matter of seconds, she was face down in the dirt with a broken arm while Edward called the police. I faded in and out of consciousness as the ambulance arrived, my body racked with pain, my blood soaking into the earth beneath me. The days that followed were a blur of hospital light surgeries and whispered conversations. My stomach had been punctured, my intestines lacerated. I needed stitches, blood transfusions, and a long list of antibiotics. I couldn't eat solid food for weeks. The physical pain was one thing, but the emotional toll, betrayal, confusion, fear, left deeper wounds. Of course there was a trial. Of course she was convicted. There was no insanity plea, no diagnosis to explain away her actions, just a declaration. Sexually sadistic. That's how they described her. Not mentally ill, just deeply, violently unwell in ways that didn't excuse what she'd done. She's in prison now, and her mother still refuses to speak to me. She blames me, as though pressing charges was some kind of cruelty, as though nearly dying was something I had asked for. Ben, oddly enough, stayed my friend. He was sorry, haunted, and guilt-ridden. It turns out he had known. He'd caught Alice watching brutal adult content, searched her history, and seen horrors that no siblings had ever discover. He had tried to protect me in his own quiet way. I just hadn't listened. I still live with the scars. They've faded from bright red to soft, pale reminders, but they're there, on my skin, in my dreams, in the way I now flinch at sudden touches or step back when someone gets too close. The worst part, perhaps, is not the pain or the memory of Alice's smile as the blade sank in. It's the betrayal, the realization that darkness can wear the face of someone you like, even love. That evil doesn't always come cloaked in shadows and snarls. Sometimes it smiles and invites you for a walk in the woods. I don't date anymore. Not seriously. I don't trust easily. I've learned the hard way what secrets people can keep buried just beneath the surface, like blades beneath soft hands. Therapists have told me I did nothing wrong, but the guilt lingers, quiet and ever-present. I replay that moment in my head, her reaching for the box, me letting her. Was there something I missed? A sign? A warning? Could I have run? Should I have refused? These questions loop through my mind like old songs with no end. Some nights, I dream of the woods again. Only this time the bridge never ends, and I keep walking into the trees, never reaching the other side. Sometimes, Alice is waiting. Other times she's already behind me, whispering words I can't understand. But still I walk, and still I wonder, not just about Alice, but about myself, about the boy who followed her into the woods, about the man who came out, who I am now, because of what happened, and who I might been had she never asked, "Do you like bondage, Henry?" It's a question that changed everything, and though I survived, I'm not sure I ever really escaped. Story 2. The Night Visitors. It was the end of 2017, and I was already worn thin by a year that had drained me in ways I couldn't explain. Emotionally, physically, even financially. It all came to a head when my father's health declined so rapidly, he had to be placed into aged care. He lived in Tasmania, the island I grew up on, while I was based in Brisbane, over 1,500 kilometers to the north. What followed was a cycle of exhausting flights, each trip a blend of bureaucracy and heartbreak as I tried to manage his affairs. In the process, I ended up staying alone in his old house, a weathered place that creaked at every corner, nestled in a semi-rural setting where trees grew wild and thick. brushing the window panes when the wind picked up. The home had no power. The air was damp and musty, and it sat wide open to anyone who had the nerve to wander in. It was, in many ways, a shell, and I was its only echo. I'd cleared out almost everything from the house, packing up a lifetime of belongings so it could eventually be sold. The only thing I kept was a pile of blankets and pillows, thrown together on the bare floor to serve as a makeshift bed during my visits. That Christmas Eve, I flew in late and stopped by a friend's house 10 minutes away. After a few beers and some reminiscing, his wife, bless her, offered to drive me to my dad's place. I was slightly buzzed but not drunk. I didn't want to risk the road. It was around midnight when I stepped out of their car and into the quiet that wrapped around the property like a blanket woven from the wind itself. The house was pitch black inside, and for a moment, I just stood there, listening to the stillness before flipping the light switch. Of course, nothing happened. No power, just me and my phone flashlight. Navigating through the house, I quickly noticed something was off. A few tools I'd left around during my last visit were missing. A hammer, a wrench, maybe a screwdriver or two. Nothing big, but enough to raise a red flag. The larger toolbox I'd stored in the locked laundry cupboard, however, was still there, scratched and dented, as though someone had tried to break it open and failed. I chuckled bitterly, imagining the thief giving up in frustration. "Nice try," I muttered aloud, trying to shake off the unease gnawing at me. After a cursory glance through the rooms, I lay down on the floor with my blankets and tried to get comfortable. The cold seeped up from the floorboards, and the silence grew heavier by the minute. Sleep didn't come easily. My ears strained against the dark, waiting. It was the crunch of gravel that stirred me, faint but deliberate, boots grinding slowly along the path that ran up the side of the house. I held my breath and listened harder. The footsteps paused, and then, with an echoing metallic thud, something struck the railing by the back steps. My pulse quickened. My logical mind tried to blame a wombat or maybe a possum, but the sound had been too heavy, too human. I sat up, every nerve lit like a fuse. The silence returned, stretching on until I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. But then I heard it, the unmistakable squeak of the back door being nudged open. My body froze. I didn't move, barely breathed. Soft steps crept through the back hallway, and then I heard whispers, low, rushed, and panicked. One voice said, "Shackwick." That was all I needed to hear. Fumbling with my phone, I dialed the police and whispered into the receiver, burying my voice under a pillow. The dispatcher stayed calm, assuring me that officers were on their way. Meanwhile, from across the house, I heard the sounds of my locked toolbox being tampered with, metal clinks, frustrated grunts. My heart pounded as the dispatcher suggested I lock myself in the room. As quietly as I could, I tiptoed to the door, but the second I stepped, a floorboard let out a long, loud groan. Everything fell silent. I didn't breathe. A long 30 seconds passed before I took another step, this one squeaking even louder. Then, scrambling, the sounds of feet rushing back through the hallway, a door swinging open, then the hollow sound of the night swallowing everything again. I clicked the lock shut and whispered to the dispatcher, "I think they're gone." She advised me to stay put until officers arrived, which I gladly agreed to. I stayed like that, motionless in the dark, until I saw red and blue lights flickering through the curtain. The knock on the door felt like a gunshot in the silence, but I let the officers in with shaking hands. They searched the area. No suspects found. No clues left behind. One officer examined the toolbox and scoffed. "Why didn't they just use bolt cutters?" he said, laughing. The other officer theorized that they must have broken in earlier, stolen what they could, failed to break the lock, and left to get better tools, only to return just after I had unknowingly walked in on their second attempt. That theory chilled me more than anything. I had walked into a trap without knowing it. The police left shortly after filing the report. I stayed up until the sun rose, then slept for maybe 2 hours before my friend's wife came to pick me up. She took me back to their place, where I could collect my car and leave the rest of the night behind. I asked if I could keep my tools at their house for a while, and they agreed. That day, after visiting my dad for Christmas lunch at the care facility, I drove to the hardware store and bought the strongest door locks I could find. As I stood in the checkout line, still replaying the sounds of boots and whispers, I realized how lucky I had been. A few minutes later, or earlier, and the outcome might have been entirely different. The scariest part wasn't just the intrusion. It was the realization that someone had been watching the house, that they knew I would return, that they had scoped it out enough to come back, better equipped, under the cover of darkness, likely assuming I wouldn't show up until Christmas morning. It was a reminder that even places filled with childhood memories, your family home, your safe place, can be turned into something alien and hostile when strangers decide to make it theirs. That night, the shadows didn't belong to trees. They belonged to intentions I'll never understand, and people I never saw, but I heard them, and I'll never forget the sound. The house was sold a few months later, and I didn't return. I don't think I could have, even if I'd wanted to. I still have dreams about those footsteps, slow, deliberate, hungry. I hear them moving through the house, passing my sleeping body, waiting just out of view. Sometimes in those dreams, I get up to check the window, and every time I see them staring back, just a silhouette, smiling faintly, standing in the rain. Story 3. The Attic Secret. I work for a well-known pest control company, the kind that's called in when things get serious. Rats, roaches, infestations beyond what average homeowners can handle. I'm an inspector, meaning I crawl through crawl spaces, attics, and basements, poking around in places most people wouldn't dare to look. Bugs don't bother me. Rodents don't scare me. I've handled hornets, scorpions, and even a nest of angry raccoons once. It's just part of the job. But there was one job, one call in the dead of February, that still lingers in the back of my mind like a film of smoke you can't wipe away. The woman on the phone said she had a fly problem. Houseflies. I rolled my eyes at first. In my experience, flies usually mean a dead mouse in the wall or something rotting in the drain. Easy fix. Quick check. Done before dark. Or so I thought. The house wasn't what I expected. A 2-story farmhouse, the kind you'd see on a postcard, freshly painted with a white picket fence. When I pulled up, the late afternoon light was already starting to fade, casting long shadows across the porch. The homeowner looked exhausted. She answered the door with hollow eyes and sleep-deprived silence. Her house was spotless. No trash, no rot, no pet droppings, nothing out of place. But when I stepped into the living room, I stopped cold. The air was thick with the sound of buzzing, hundreds, no thousands of houseflies. The window panes were black with them, both dead and alive. Some crawled over each other in lazy, gliding movements. Others buzzed erratically, throwing themselves into the glass like they were trying to escape something invisible. Flies like that don't just appear. Not in those numbers. I checked the kitchen, the drains, the trash bins, all clean. Nothing smelled off. No moisture build-up, no open food. I checked behind cabinets and under the sink. Nothing. Upstairs, same thing, pristine. But still the flies. At that point I knew I had to dig deeper. I asked if she'd checked the attic. She hesitated, and then admitted she hadn't been up there in months. No reason to. It was sealed and unfinished, with only a crawl hole in the hallway ceiling. I dragged my ladder inside, climbed up, and pushed open the hatch. The only light I had was my inspection flashlight, its battery already fading to a dull yellow. I pulled myself up, elbows against the beams, and instantly felt the change in air. Thick, still, unnaturally quiet. The attic was lined with old insulation and a plastic moisture barrier, a thin membrane that prevented odors from escaping down into the house. That's why the smell never reached her. But what it hid was worse than any stench. At first I thought it was a prank. Shapes carved from bone and fur arranged in unnatural positions. Small dolls twisted into grotesque parodies of animals. Symbols painted in a dark, dried substance, blood, and at the center, a circle of flies swarming around what looked like a makeshift altar, built from wood scraps and bone. I froze, unsure of what I was looking at. The air felt wrong, heavy like it was pressing down on me. My chest tightened, not from fear but from something older and deeper, something primal. I took a step back. My foot hit a loose board, and it creaked loud enough to split the silence. The buzzing rose, as if in response. I climbed down as fast as I could and sealed the attic hatch behind me. I didn't want to touch anything more than I had to. I told the homeowner she had something beyond a pest problem. I documented everything, took photos, and contacted both my supervisor and the police. She listened quietly, nodding, and then started crying. Not out of fear, but out of relief. I thought I was going insane, she whispered. I heard noises, scratches, but I thought it was just the flies. I stayed just long enough to give my statement and left. I never wanted to go back, but the moment I drove away, the weight didn't lift. I had the photos in my phone, and I couldn't stop thinking about them. I tried deleting them, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw them again. Those shapes, that circle, the swarm of flies. That night, and the ones that followed, I began having night terrors. At first they were flashes, dark corridors, red symbols, whispers just outside the range of hearing. Then they became full dreams. I'd find myself standing in that attic again, only this time I couldn't move. The buzzing was deafening. Something was in the shadows with me, just out of reach. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart racing, the feeling of something lingering in the room with me. I'm not a religious man, but I started keeping a Bible on my nightstand. I wasn't sure what else to do. It felt like whatever was in that attic hadn't stayed there, like something had attached itself to me. My flashlight, the one I used that day, burned out the next time I tried to use it, even though it was fully charged. My phone screen started glitching, freezing on the last image I took of the attic whenever I opened my gallery. The police said someone had likely been squatting up there, maybe a mentally unstable individual, but I know what I saw. The homeowner moved out a few weeks later, left everything behind. I don't know where she went. I called the office and asked to be reassigned from residential jobs for a while. I couldn't walk into another attic without my hands shaking. I started researching occult symbols, ancient rituals, anything to make sense of what I had seen. Most of what I found made it worse. The symbols matched old protection wards, only they had been carved upside down, reversed, not to keep something out, to let something in. That house wasn't haunted, it was a gateway, and someone had opened it. Whether they knew it or not didn't matter. They had welcomed something in and then left it to fester above their heads. Months later, I still think about it. Every time I see a fly buzzing lazily by a window, my skin crawls. Every time I hear the attic creak above me in my own home, I wonder if something followed me back. The dreams are less frequent now, but they haven't stopped. I wake up with scratches sometimes, tiny ones, like fingernail marks. I tell myself it's nothing. Maybe it is, or maybe it isn't. All I know is that evil doesn't always show its face. Sometimes it waits, silent and still, just beyond the wooden beams above your head, watching, waiting, remembering. I don't take attic jobs anymore. I request basements, crawl spaces, anywhere but up. My co-workers joke about it, call me superstitious. I laugh along, but I never explain. Some things are easier to carry when you keep them hidden. But I've never been the same since that day, because I didn't just walk into a nest of flies. I walked into something older than fear itself, and I still feel it, even now, breathing softly behind the walls of every quiet room I enter. Story 4. The stranger behind the screen. I was 17, freshly enrolled at university, full of hope and curiosity about the world. High school had been a lonely place for me. A long parade of unreturned glances, quiet lunch breaks, and the constant echo of feeling like I didn't quite belong. I'd never had a boyfriend, never even been on a proper date. So when I received a friend request on MSN Messenger from someone named Ken, a name that suggested we might share the same cultural background, I didn't think much of it. It was the early 2000s after all. Back then, people added strangers without question, and social media wasn't yet coated in the paranoia it carries today. I accepted the request and we began chatting almost instantly. Ken was charming, polite, and curious about my life. He told me he lived in the same city and was close to my age. Something about him felt familiar, like he belonged to a version of my world that was just out of reach. At first, our conversations were light. What kind of music we liked, which classes we were taking, our favorite foods. There was a sweet intensity to it, like we were peeling layers off each other slowly. He asked to see me through webcam. I hesitated but eventually agreed, and to my surprise he was handsome, normal, sitting in a bedroom that looked like anyone else's. The mystery faded and was replaced by an innocent sort of thrill. I developed a crush on him. We began texting, even talking on the phone. He made me laugh. I looked forward to his messages, checked my phone before bed hoping for a good night. He asked me out a few times, but our schedules didn't line up until one quiet afternoon when I finally said yes. He offered to pick me up from campus. I dressed a little nicer than usual and waited outside, my stomach flipping with nerves and excitement. When he pulled up in his black car, the windows were tinted so dark I couldn't see inside until the passenger window rolled down. There he was, just as cute as I remembered, but the car was thick with the smell of weed, a scent that hit me like a punch. I hesitated. He smiled and motioned for me to get in. I obeyed without thinking, trying to suppress my concern. Almost immediately, his hand found my thigh. I shifted away and asked if he needed help getting to the restaurant. He just smiled again and started driving. I noticed we were heading toward the highway, in the opposite direction of the place we were supposed to eat. My heart sank. I tried to sound calm as I reminded him that the restaurant was nearby. He brushed it off and said, "I thought maybe we could go to my place instead. I'll make you lunch. We can play some Need for Speed." His voice was smooth, almost rehearsed. I panicked, but I didn't want to seem rude. I didn't want to ruin our first date. So I agreed, telling myself it was just lunch and a game, nothing more. His house was in a rough part of town. Empty. Quiet. Unfurnished. He told me it was his family home, but it didn't feel lived in. The Xbox was in his bedroom, where he invited me to sit on the bed beside him. I did, nervously holding the controller. He made us PBJs, tried to act normal. But then things turned strange. He moved behind me on the bed, straddling me with his legs, guiding my hands on the controller at first, then slowly letting his own hands drift beneath my shirt, not to grope, but to massage my belly. I was stunned, frozen. I had never experienced something like that. I pulled away, stood up quickly, and fixed my shirt. He looked at me and said, "I like it." I lied and said I had a group project to attend to and needed to return to campus. He asked where I lived. offering to drive me home. I told him to take me back to school instead. Thankfully, he did. That night, I decided I wanted nothing more to do with Ken. I didn't block him. Something in me still wanted to be polite, to disappear quietly. But I stopped replying to his messages and ignored his calls. He'd send a cab, he said. It's nothing dirty, promised. I didn't answer. His messages became more spaced out and eventually, he vanished. I thought that was the end of it. That's the end of it. Months passed. My life continued. But in the spring, my family and I went to visit my Aunt Annie in the Caribbean. She was deeply spiritual, part of a religious organization, and had recently returned from a trip to our family's homeland. During her visit, she had met a woman named Connie. Well off, charming, connected. They became fast friends. Annie introduced her to us over Skype. Connie seemed kind, warm, interested in me. But as time passed, she began saying strange things, telling me I should transfer schools to the US, asking if I was a virgin, and insisting I save myself for my husband. She got pushy, unnerving. I was already burnt out from school and her insistence wore me down, until I withdrew from friends, skipped classes, stopped socializing altogether. That's when everything started falling apart. Eventually, we discovered that Connie was a con artist. She had embedded herself into our lives with terrifying precision, stealing over $100,000 from our family. She fled as soon as she was exposed. The betrayal shook us. I was still processing it when, months later, my phone rang. An unknown number. But the caller ID had a name. A man's name with Connie's last name. My heart dropped. I picked up, and it was Ken. His voice sounded like a ghost crawling out of the past. He said hello like nothing had happened, like it hadn't been months of silence. I snapped, told him I'd call the police if he ever contacted me again. He laughed, low and dry, and said, "Well, okay then," before hanging up. That was the moment everything clicked. Ken wasn't just some random boy. He had been part of Connie's plan. I had never told anyone about Ken, never mentioned his name, but Connie she had known. The timing, the manipulation, the way they both disappeared once exposed. It was too perfect, too rehearsed. I realized Ken had likely been a pawn in a larger scheme, planted to watch me, maybe even to groom me, to keep me isolated and vulnerable. And Connie, she had almost convinced me to leave the country, to transfer schools, to vanish. I would have been gone, and no one would have known where I went. Looking back, it terrifies me. My family thinks she was involved in trafficking, that if I had accepted the offer, I wouldn't have come back. I was so naive, so desperate for connection, that I nearly walked right into a trap. Now, years later, I still can't find a trace of Ken online. He left no digital footprint. It's like he never existed. Connie vanished too. That whole chapter of my life feels like something from a psychological thriller, something too twisted to have happened in real life, but it did. And it changed me. I don't trust easily anymore. I avoid spiritual organizations. I question every new person I meet. I learned that danger doesn't always knock loudly. Sometimes it whispers through friendly messages, charming smiles, and kind promises. Sometimes it invites you to lunch and plays video games on a quiet bed in an empty house. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you leave before the door locks behind you. Story 5. The Elevator Ghost. It was autumn of my freshman year in college, a crisp and breezy time when the air smelled like change, and the leaves whispered old secrets. I was just 18, living in the dorms on a quiet floor reserved mostly for early risers and night owls, students who minded their own business and seldom made noise after dark. Our dorm was unique in that it had one single elevator, an old one, clunky and slow, technically installed for students with physical disabilities. But since no one on our floor required it, it was rarely used. That detail alone should have made what happened feel odd from the start, but I ignored it. I had just gotten over a long, draining bout of shingles, and though I was physically fine, my mind hadn't quite caught up. I felt disoriented some days, easily startled on others. That afternoon I was going out for a long run and had decided to use the elevator, justified by the 5 miles I was about to log. As I walked toward it, everything felt quiet. Not campus quiet or library quiet, but hollow quiet, the kind that presses against your chest and makes you question whether you're truly alone. I turned the corner and saw it. The elevator at the end of the hall, doors closed, the light above flickering slightly, and in front of it, a figure. At first glance, he looked like any other student, average height, dark hair, wearing plaid shorts and a t-shirt, clothes that seemed more suited for summer than fall. But there was something strange about him. His skin was unusually pale, as if drained of color. His posture was too still. He wasn't leaning against the wall or shifting his weight, like most people waiting for an elevator. He stood there like a statue, fixed in place. Then he turned and looked directly at me. His expression wasn't threatening, but it wasn't welcoming either. It was cold, detached, unfeeling. What struck me hardest were his eyes. They weren't normal. They glowed, not metaphorically, not in the poetic sense, but truly glowed. Pale yellow with no pupils, not white, not bloodshot, just solid, luminous yellow, like the headlights of a car in the fog. The moment our eyes met, the temperature dropped. I remember this vividly, because I had just zipped up my hoodie a moment earlier and was now shivering, like someone had thrown me into a freezer. I stopped walking, unsure whether to proceed or turn around. My rational mind whispered that it could be a trick of the light, that maybe I was seeing things, still recovering from being sick, maybe still fatigued. But when I blinked, he was still there, still staring. The air was too quiet. There was no hum from the vending machines or the faint chatter of other students. Just silence, breath and heartbeat. Then, without warning, he vanished. Not with a blink or a flicker or a dissolve. Just gone. One moment he was there, the next he wasn't. The hallway returned to its normal warmth. The humming of the electronics resumed. I stood frozen, unsure whether to approach the elevator or just go back to my room. But my feet moved before my thoughts did, and I walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and when the doors opened, it was empty, of course it was. I stepped inside, but couldn't bring myself to look in the mirrored panel. Something told me I wouldn't like what I saw. I finished my run that evening in a daze. The encounter clung to me like a film I couldn't scrub off. I didn't use the elevator again, not once for the rest of the semester. I took the stairs every time, even when I was carrying heavy groceries or coming home drenched from the rain. My friends noticed, joked about it, but I never explained. I didn't know how to. What would I say? That I saw a ghost? A hallucination? A trick of the light? I kept it to myself until years later, long after I had left the dorms, when I returned to the university for my master's program. Even then, I avoided that hallway out of habit, the memory too vivid to casually walk past. I later learned that the dorm had once been part of an old tuberculosis ward before it was converted for student housing. That piece of history was never advertised, buried beneath renovations and cheerful brochures. But when I dug through the school archives, I found it. Photographs, patient logs, maps that matched the layout of our building. That elevator had once led to a quarantine floor. The area where I saw him used to be where patients were wheeled in and left under watch. The idea chilled me deeper than any ghost story I'd read. I began to wonder if what I saw wasn't just a ghost, but an imprint, an echo of someone who had suffered, died, and never left. Even now, I can still see his face if I close my eyes. Those yellow eyes, devoid of anything human. I've never seen anything like them since. I've had no other paranormal encounters, no follow-up visitations, no weird dreams. Just that one moment, crystalline, seared into memory. Eternal. It didn't come with a message or a warning. It didn't even speak. But somehow it changed me, made me believe in things I used to mock, gave me a cautious respect for the unknown, for whatever exists in the space between flickering lights and flickering lives. So when people tell me ghosts aren't real, I just nod. I don't argue. Let them believe what they want, but I know what I saw that autumn day. I know what it felt like to be frozen in a hallway filled with nothing but cold, and a stare that didn't belong to anything alive. Some ghosts don't need to say anything. They just need to be seen. And once you see them, they never truly leave you. Story 6. The Twitter Stranger. I was 15 when I made my first Twitter account. A shy teenager in the suburbs of Paris with no real friends and an aching need to connect with someone, anyone. I kept my profile anonymous. My display picture was just an avatar, and I never posted any photos of myself. I didn't even tell anyone I had an account. Not my parents, not my classmates. I followed a few random accounts, mostly to keep myself entertained during lonely nights. My tweets were light and casual, sometimes vague, sometimes about the weather or local transportation. Nothing serious. So when I got a message one evening from someone named Rob, claiming to be 17 and about to move to my town to start at my school, I was cautious but intrigued. He asked if I lived in Meudon, and my heart skipped a beat. There was no way he should have known that. I'd only mentioned it once, in passing, in a tweet about bus routes. It seemed like a stretch, but I gave him the benefit of the doubt. His messages were friendly and polite. He asked about school, the cafeteria food, the teachers, the class schedules. He didn't push too hard. Didn't ask for anything personal, not at first. So I let the conversation continue, night after night, until it became a kind of ritual. I would come home, do my homework, and wait for Rob's messages. It felt nice to be noticed, to be seen by someone who was curious about me, and not mocking me like the bullies at school did every day. Over time, I began to open up more. I started to look forward to our chats. I imagined him walking through the halls with me, sitting with me at lunch. I didn't realize I was falling for him until it was too late. Eventually, his questions grew more specific. He wanted to know where I lived, whether I lived in a house or apartment, whether I was often home alone. I felt a cold pinch in my gut but ignored it. He had already told me so much about himself. Shared personal details, sent me selfies. He seemed real, and I wanted him to be real. I brushed aside the warning signs because I didn't want to lose the only person who seemed genuinely interested in me. Then, just before the school break ended in December, Rob said he had moved into town and would be joining my school. I was thrilled. He asked if we could meet on the first day back. I suggested we meet in the school hallway, but he hesitated. He said it would be hard to recognize me in a crowd and preferred somewhere more private. I agreed to meet him in the third-floor bathroom, a place off limits during breaks, quiet, deserted. When I saw him that day, my heart leapt. He looked like his pictures, maybe a little older, but still familiar. We talked for a while, and he made me feel at ease. At lunch, he asked me to go with him to a fast food place, but I declined. He offered to walk me to my bus stop instead. That became our routine. Quick conversations in the bathroom during breaks, walks to the bus stop after class. He never walked me to my actual house, and I never saw him anywhere else on campus. I assumed it was because of our different class schedules. It never occurred to me that something was deeply wrong. For over a month, we met like this. I never saw him in the cafeteria, never bumped into him in the halls. It seemed odd in retrospect, but back then, I had already decided to trust him. Then, on a Thursday in mid-December, I casually mentioned that I'd be home alone that evening. Just me with my mum working late, my dad away on business, and my siblings out. I didn't think twice. That evening he walked me to the bus stop as usual. I got on the bus and waved at him before putting on my headphones. The ride was uneventful, but as I stepped off and started walking home, something felt off. The air was thick with silence, and my stomach twisted with a sense of being watched. I paused my music but kept my headphones in, hoping to appear unaware. Then I heard footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate, too close. I didn't turn around. I simply reached for my keys, pulled them from my pocket and ran. I sprinted the last stretch home, fumbled with the lock, and slammed the door shut just as the footsteps quickened behind me. Inside, I turned off the alarm and peered through the glass panel on the front door. Standing a few meters away was Rob, staring at me with a grin that turned my blood to ice. His presence was chilling. His eyes locked on mine with a look that wasn't just creepy. It was possessive. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed a knife, but by the time I got back to the door, he was pounding on it. His fists crashed into the wood like thunder. I could feel each blow rattle through my bones. I feared the glass would shatter. I pressed my body against the door, praying it would hold. Then he circled the house, banging on the shutters, tapping on the windows. I could hear him whispering my name. He made his way back to the front, face twisted in frustration, until a car pulled into the driveway. My neighbor. Rob bolted like a shadow, disappearing into the night. The next day I was flooded with messages from Rob on Twitter. Apologies, love confessions, rage. He created new accounts every time I blocked one, each username a string of letters and numbers, all variations of his name. Eventually, I deleted my account, too overwhelmed to keep up with the onslaught. I later asked around at school, trying to confirm if he'd really been a student there. No one knew him. No one had even heard of him. It dawned on me that he'd never been enrolled. He had lied about everything. He had never meant to be part of my world, only to study it from the shadows, to find a way in. To this day, I don't know what his endgame was. Abduction. Worse. The scariest part is knowing what could have happened had I hesitated for even a second longer that night. I think about the third-floor bathroom, the odd places he chose for our meetings, how he never appeared anywhere else, how easily he gained my trust. It's terrifying how quickly isolation and a kind voice can become a cage. I still live with the questions. I still double-check locks, look over my shoulder. I've never joined another social media platform under my real name. And every now and then, a random follow request with a jumbled username and no profile picture sends my heart into a spiral. It reminds me that some ghosts don't haunt houses. They haunt timelines, passwords, and the trust you once gave away to a stranger with a kind smile and too many questions. So Rob, wherever you are, I hope we never meet again. But I know you're still out there, watching, waiting, and I hope the silence you left behind is louder than any knock you'll ever dare to make again. Story 7. The party that shouldn't have happened. It had been several years since I last saw Sandy, a girl I knew from high school. We hadn't been close, just casual acquaintances who crossed paths now and then at mutual friends' parties. She had invited me to one such party years ago, and though nothing came of it at the time, I did end up meeting my high school girlfriend Andrea there. So the night was memorable in its own way. Years later, after graduation and the usual drifting apart, I randomly ran into Sandy while walking through town. We exchanged pleasantries, updated each other on life, and one thing led to another. That same night, I found myself at her place. She offered me wine, and after a couple of glasses, things escalated. We ended up in her bed in the living room. It wasn't anything particularly romantic or passionate, but it felt oddly inevitable. It was quiet, still, And then something changed. Afterwards, Sandy got up and shuffled across the room into the kitchen, which was separated from the living area by a wide doorway. I lay there in the dim light, feeling the haze of post-coital grogginess settle over me. The kitchen light flicked on with a harsh buzz, one of those old fluorescent fixtures that emit a low hum like a dying machine. The glow from the kitchen bled into the otherwise dark living room, and I remember squinting at it, suddenly uneasy. There was something about the quality of that light that felt unnatural, cold and sterile, like it didn't belong in a home. I sat up slightly, trying to dismiss the creeping discomfort, but then I heard voices. At first I assumed she was talking on the phone, her voice low, whispering urgently, but the longer I listened, the more I realized that wasn't quite right. There were two voices, and they were both hers. It sounded like she was arguing with herself, but with an intensity that was building. No pauses, no breaks. Just this strange dual stream of her voice echoing in tight, angry whispers. My skin prickled. My instincts, those deep, buried animal instincts, told me something wasn't right. I quietly slipped out of bed and began putting my clothes back on as silently as I could. I didn't want her to hear. I didn't want to interrupt whatever this was. 5 minutes passed. Still no movement from the kitchen. No footsteps, no approach. Just that same urgent argument, layered in a tone of rising frustration. I crept to the edge of the bed and sat still, listening, trying to make sense of it. Then came the metallic clatter. The unmistakable sound of a drawer being yanked open. Cutlery. A knife. Panic took root in my chest. I looked around the room for anything I could use as a weapon, something to defend myself with if I had to. But before I could move, the buzzing from the kitchen light stopped. The room fell into silence, and the light flickered out. The sudden darkness was blinding. Then, footsteps. Slow and steady, they moved out of the kitchen and into the living room. I didn't breathe. My eyes strained in the dark until finally I saw her. Sandy emerged from the shadows, calm and smiling, empty-handed. Her voice returned to the sweet, gentle tone from before. "Do you really have to go?" she asked softly. My heart pounded against my ribs, but I forced myself to nod. "I've got work in the morning," I lied. "Didn't want to wake you." She stepped closer, eyes searching my face. I mumbled another excuse and slipped past her, keeping a safe distance as I made my way to the door. She didn't stop me, didn't say goodbye, just stood there in the dark, that strange smile frozen on her lips. I walked into the night with my breath still caught in my throat, the cold air shocking me back into full consciousness. I didn't look back. I never called her after that. I deleted her number and tried to forget what had happened, but the image of her standing there in the darkness, those whispered voices in the kitchen, it all stayed with me. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe she had mental health issues. Maybe it was just a strange moment, a breakdown. It wasn't until months later that I ran into another former classmate and casually mentioned seeing Sandy again. Their response froze me. "Oh, poor Sandy," they said. "She got released recently, right?" I asked what they meant. "She was institutionalized right after high school. She had a breakdown. Tried to hurt someone at a party, I think. You didn't hear about it?" My blood turned cold. That party, the one where I'd met Andrea, the one Sandy had hosted and invited me to, was apparently not just a casual gathering, according to the classmate. Sandy had planned that party for months. Not for fun, but to try and get close to me. She had been obsessed. Andrea just happened to catch my attention first. I never saw Sandy again. I moved across the country, started fresh. But sometimes, when I lie in bed at night and the shadows in the corners of the room grow too still, I think of her standing there, alone, smiling, whispering to someone who wasn't there. I don't go to reunions. I don't answer friend requests from names I barely remember. I keep to myself. I suppose she's doing better now. Got a job, went back to school, maybe even living a stable life. But that night, In that apartment filled with fluorescent shadows and whispered arguments with herself, I saw a different version of her, a version I'll never forget. And if I'm being honest, I hope she never remembers me. Story 8. The divorce that turned violent. It's been years now, but I still remember the moment my marriage ended like it happened yesterday. Julia and I had been together for a long time, and I truly believed I loved her with everything I had. I wasn't a perfect man, but I never cheated, never lied, and never gave her reason to doubt my commitment. So when she came to me one morning with accusations of infidelity, wild, baseless claims, I was blindsided. At first I thought it was a misunderstanding, a moment of misplaced insecurity, but things escalated fast. Within days, she had filed for divorce and poisoned the court with her story. No evidence, no proof. But in the eyes of the judge, her tears and trembling voice were all the confirmation needed. I lost everything. Our home, our savings, and the regular presence of my children. I moved into a tiny 2-room apartment and took on 2 jobs just to keep up with the alimony and child support payments. The woman I thought I knew turned out to be someone entirely different. For a time, I considered fighting for custody of our children, my son and daughter, who meant everything to me. But the moment Julia threatened to accuse me of child abuse and molestation if I contested her in court, I knew I had no chance. No judge would believe me over her. And if even a whisper of that accusation was spoken aloud, it would stick with me for life, true or not. So I backed down. I accepted the pain, swallowed the injustice, and tried to move forward. I was allowed to see the kids every 3rd or 4th Saturday, depending on her mood, and even then she interfered. Visits were cancelled last minute. Excuses piled up. My children, once the light of my life, were being turned against me, their minds twisted by someone who claimed to love them. It wasn't until months later that I began noticing something was deeply wrong. My son showed up with a bruised arm and a cut that he brushed off as the result of a fight at school. I didn't believe him, but I didn't press. A few weeks later, my daughter arrived with similar bruises and the same excuse. Their clothes were getting more worn. They seemed thinner, quieter. The sparkle in their eyes was fading. Julia was getting more than enough in support checks to take care of them comfortably. So where was the money going? When I asked the kids gently, they dodged. My son would look at the ground. My daughter would change the subject. Something wasn't right. I didn't have the money for a private investigator, but a close friend of mine, more financially stable, offered to help. We installed a security camera in my apartment just in case, though I didn't yet know what we were preparing for. The detective returned a few weeks later with a grim face and a thick envelope of photos. Julia had been meeting with shady characters in parking lots and alleys. She was using the money meant for our children on drugs and designer clothes. There were shots of her leaving malls with expensive bags, her arms full of luxury while our kids were wearing clothes too small for their growing bodies. Then came the photos that broke me. Through a window, the detective captured images of Julia, with a raised fist, standing over our children. They were crying, flinching, trying to protect themselves. The school fights were lies. The bruises were hers. The pain was hers. I stared at those photos for a long time, sick to my stomach. But it was the next night that everything exploded. Around 2 a.m, the doorbell to my apartment rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole and there she was, Julia, face twisted with rage, standing on my doorstep in the middle of the night. I opened the door cautiously, and she stormed inside. "You hired someone to follow me, didn't you?" she hissed. "To take pictures of me." I said nothing for a moment, just watched her, trying to decide whether she was high, drunk, or both. "I had my reasons," I finally said, "and now I have everything I need to take the kids." Her face darkened like a storm rolling in. She stood still, breathing hard. "If I can't have them," she whispered, Neither will you. Then she pulled a knife. I moved too late. She stabbed me in the shoulder before I could react. The pain was immediate and blinding. I staggered back into the living room, trying to put distance between us, but she came at me again, slashing wildly. One cut landed deep in my forearm. Blood poured down my hand. Desperate, I grabbed a lamp and threw it at her. It connected with her head, and she crumpled to the floor, unconscious. I stumbled to the phone and called the police, my vision swimming. When they arrived, she had just started to regain consciousness, but she had already rehearsed her lie. She claimed I attacked her, and she was defending herself. I said nothing. I just pointed to the camera in the corner of the ceiling. The footage showed everything: her breaking in, the stabbing, my attempts to flee. Her lies unraveled within minutes. She was arrested on the spot. The charges stacked high: assault with a deadly weapon, child abuse, drug possession, and willful neglect. Her sentence was long, too long to count on your fingers. She'll be old by the time she gets out, and I doubt she'll recognize the people she once called her family. I couldn't immediately take the children in. I was still recovering financially and physically, but the court awarded me full custody once I could provide a stable environment. Until then, my kids stayed with my parents, far away from the home that had become a prison. I visit them every weekend now. I call them every night. We're rebuilding slowly, with quiet moments and unspoken apologies. They've started smiling again, eating better, sleeping through the night. My daughter made me a Father's Day card that said, "Thank you for finding us again." I keep it on my nightstand. As for me, the scars on my body have healed, but the ones in my heart are still tender. Not because I miss Julia, but because I loved a woman who turned into a monster, and I never saw it coming. It makes you question your own judgment, your ability to see people for who they are, but it also makes you stronger, wiser. These days I sleep with the doors locked, the camera's still rolling, not out of fear but out of habit, out of caution. I tell my children that monsters aren't always under the bed or in the closet. Sometimes they're the ones who tuck you in at night. But we escaped, and we're healing, together.